I'm happy to present our work, Are You Really Listening? Boosting Perceptual Awareness in Music QA Benchmarks, led by Yongyi, Zang, who can't be here, and myself and a couple other collaborators at the University of California, San Diego. So I don't think I really need to justify the sort of modern claim that modern LLMs are very, very strong reasoners. You know, we've come a long way from the sort of era of just, say, think step by step and it gets really good. These models are really quite good at these sort of long reasoning chains and this deductive reasoning. But when we move to sort of these multimodal language models, and for our kind of interest, the language models that can hear and listen to music, it really requires two things. One of this is perception, that in this case that we can see, there are maybe 4 lines, or maybe there are 3 lines depending on where you're looking at this optical illusion. So it needs perception, but also reasoning, that it needs to be able to say, okay, given this sort of weird thing going on, this is definitely an optical illusion. Stairs or bars don't normally look like this. And this begs the question that when we are comparing sort of perception, the ability to perceive the extra modality, versus reasoning, the ability to think about it, how much of perception versus reasoning is really required to solve current music question answering benchmarks? So for us, we looked at Mucho music from ISMIR last year, 2024. And normally this just looks like, given some audio clip of some music, answer some 4-way multiple choice question. And then to allow normal LLMs to actually interact with this, there's no audio because they can't listen. And then we tell them to provide their best guess. And because sometimes they'll refuse because there's no audio, we have to tell them to like, if you didn't hear anything, just try again. And most importantly, think step by step. And what we find, where the large audio language models, the ones with ears in red, and then the text-only ones in blue, is that a lot of these text-only language models can guess the right answer and do much better than their large audio language model counterparts. I think even striking like OpenMU is a fine-tuned version of Llama 3.1, 8 billion, and does worse than that. So how is this possible? If we're trying to train these models that can listen to music, but they're just getting beat by ones that can't, are we really testing and assessing multimodal perception? And I kind of just want to walk through sort of one sort of reasoning chain of a unimodal LLM to kind of see how. So if we have some question like which instrument initiates the piece, with synthesizer, rueful tune, acoustic guitar, and vocals as possible answers, what we see is sort of 2 main sort of emergent behaviors. One is being able to reason based on context. So clearly, rueful tune is the kind of odd one out here. It's not really an instrument, and the language models are able to pick up on that and say, oh, well, I can at least kind of knock out that one. And then the other big one is reasoning based on world knowledge, that these models are trained on web-scale data, and a lot of that is talking about music, so they're able to reason and say, okay, well, a lot of acoustic guitars start pieces, and in fact, that was the correct answer. So just by kind of their base world knowledge alone, and their ability to reason on context, because this is multiple choice, they're kind of able to answer a lot of these questions without even ever listening to the audio. So if we want to build multimodal QA benchmarks that actually test audio perception, how do we do that? And our solution is kind of twofold. It's to use something that we define as the perceptual index to filter LLM-generated distractors. And I'll kind of go into how both of these things work. So perceptual index, it's just really simple. Just given a question, some set of answers, and then some subset of those answers that are distractor, everything that's not the correct answer. The perceptual index is nothing more than the log answer log probability versus the log probability of all the answers. Essentially, just saying, how hard is this question? Like, what is the overall log probability weighted for incorrect answers? And we use this under a specific just language model. We used Quen 2.5 7B at the time. And just trying to get a measure of, like, for a unimodal language model, how hard is this question? How highly is it going to weight the probability of the incorrect answers? And then what we do is, when we are going to use some LLM-generated distractors, we take a different language model. I think in this case it was one of the DeepSeeks, and ask it to generate some questions given the question and the correct answer, because we want to keep those fixed from the original Mucho music data, and also the caption, because Mucho music was built from audio caption pairs. We kind of want to generate distractors that satisfy 2 kind of factors. One, that they are plausible, they reasonably make sense, they're not something like rueful tune and it's kind of super easy to rule out. But they also need to be distinctly different from the correct answer. We can't have the LLMs generating something that is, just the correct answer and labeling it as incorrect. And when we do it like this, what we see if we take the sort of like embedding similarity under a text-only embedding model like T5 and a audio text embedding model like CLAP, that these models are much more similar in the unimodal, sorry, not model, these distractors are much more similar in the unimodal text space than they are in the multimodal clap space, kind of saying they are textually similar, something as like acoustic guitar versus electric guitar, but are musically distinct. Like those are very fundamentally different concepts. So given this sort of kind of paradigm, when we're saying using perceptual index to filter LLM-generated distractors, we're going to pick these distractors that the LLM generates, because I think we generate maybe a pool of like 20 or 25, and then pick the ones that maximize the perceptual index, essentially creating question-answer distractor sets that are maximally difficult under a unimodal language model. We want things that try to force multimodal perception as hard as possible. And with this, we have the RUL mucho music or rural mucho music. And when we see this on the sort of models that we were looking before, the sort of relative rank-induced makes a lot more sense. The text-only models are doing a lot worse and a lot closer to just random chance, kind of as they should. It's still not like completely correlated. Things are roughly grouped into parameter count where audio Flamingo 2 is around 3 billion parameters, so it's kind of grouped with the smaller models. Quen 2 audio does really good. And then actually, as of like 7 hours this morning, I think the new winner is actually Quen 3 Omni. And so this is kind of being adopted as a sort of like modern paradigm of really sort of like aggressive testing of multimodal perception. But I think besides the sort of just like rank-induced stuff, there's a couple behaviors that we looked at that I think was really important. One, that the perceptual index is a really pretty easy, good measure of actual accuracy. That, again, perceptual index was defined only under one model, like Quen 2.57 billion. But when we assess that across all of the models that we tested, there's a really high negative correlation between accuracy and perceptual index for unimodal language models, here on the left. But that basically goes away for large audio language models, that perceptual index reasonably assesses how difficult is this question without audio. The other, I think, really important part is that in the original mucho music, if you replaced the audio with just random Gaussian noise, the performance didn't drop to chance. It dropped, anywhere between like 35 to 45%, which is a pretty clear indicator that like even these audio language models don't need to listen to the audio that much if you're still able to answer 30 to 40% of the questions with just random noise. But in our version, we see all these kind of performance with Gaussian noise drop to chance, if not far worse than chance levels, which is kind of the behavior that we want. Like irrespective of sort of induced rankings, we want it so that like if we get rid of the audio, these questions would be very, very difficult to answer. Basically random. But I want to kind of zoom out a bit, because I think as we were doing this project, we kind of thought more broadly about sort of multimodality and multimodality evaluation. And there is this sort of thing that multimodal benchmarks these days are kind of weird for a lot of different reasons. Even in mucho music, there's questions that are maybe somewhat weird, because when you use an LLM to generate question answering data sets, things can get a little funky, such as who provides the backing vocals? And the answer is male backing vocals. It's like, I wonder what the correct answer was. But it's not just unique to mucho music. This is kind of true in a lot of research on multimodal language models, such as, oh, what patch was this one boss from? Or like, what reduced the health of this? Which is, I think, something that nobody would know. Or maybe questions that are trying to assess sort of cultural context about, oh, which planet does the above animal compare with? And that's maybe fine, but it's also, you're testing on one specific set of culture, and it's maybe not sort of inclusive and sort of kind of biasing towards a specific set of cultural norms. Or, and this is maybe the funniest of, what is the most popular food of the country where the instrument which is to the right of the loudest instrument in the video originated? I don't think most of us could have answered that. It's kind of, these are like ridiculous. Like, why are we asking language models to do these things? And if there's one thing that I think it's important to take away is that, researchers are really keen and focusing on what to benchmark, but we really think that focusing how to benchmark is at least as equally as important. And please check out our poster and paper for more.